You ever notice how some of the people who should feel the happiest, the ones who look like they've made it, the ones with the good job, the family, the opportunities, are the ones who secretly feel the most pressure inside, that tightness in the chest, that constant buzzing in the mind, that nagging sense of, why don't I feel the way I'm supposed to? Tonight, we're gonna break that pattern because anxiety isn't a sign of weakness, it's a signal. And when you learn how to answer that signal, everything changes. When you look at people who seem to have it all together, the ones who appear to be living the life everyone else wants, you'd think happiness should come naturally to them. But very often, those are the exact people who struggle the most. And it's not because they're ungrateful or dramatic or weak. It's because there's a silent gap growing inside them. A gap between the life they're living on the outside and the way they feel on the inside. And that gap can become the breeding ground for anxiety. Most people don't talk about this. They don't admit it. They smile, they show up, they perform, they hit milestones, they do what's expected. They collect achievements like trophies. And on the outside, it looks like they're thriving. But on the inside, something feels off, something feels out of alignment, something feels wrong, but they can't explain it. They're not sad, they're not broken, but they're also not fulfilled. And because everything looks good, they begin to believe they should feel good. And that should becomes the very trigger that makes anxiety even worse. There's a deep pressure that comes from living a life others envy. When you're someone people look up to or someone who has worked hard to build a good life, there's this unspoken expectation that you have no right to struggle. It becomes almost shameful to admit that something inside you feels heavy. So instead of speaking up, instead of questioning what's missing, you hide it. You push the feeling down. You tell yourself, I shouldn't feel this way. I have everything I need. And every time you say that, you invalidate your own emotional truth. You see, there's a difference between a life that looks successful and a life that feels meaningful. And the problem begins when you stop listening to your inner world because your outer world looks shiny enough to impress others. That's when anxiety slips in. Anxiety thrives in the space between who you are and who you're pretending to be. It grows in the silence between what you show and what you feel. It grows in the gap. A lot of people believe happiness is automatic once you hit certain achievements. But happiness isn't a result. It's a state created from alignment. When your values, emotions, actions, and identity all match, peace becomes natural. But when you wake up every day and live a life that doesn't reflect what you truly need, even if it looks impressive, your nervous system senses danger. It senses disconnection. It senses something missing, and it starts to react. Anxiety is often just the signal that you're living someone else's version of happiness. Some people climb ladders they never wanted to climb. Some chase careers that don't match their soul. Some build relationships that look perfect but feel lonely, and the world applauds them. But deep inside, there's a whisper saying, this isn't it. This isn't enough. This isn't me. And instead of listening to that whisper, they drown it in business, productivity, and performance until it becomes a roar. That roar is what people call anxiety. And when that happens, they begin to wonder what's wrong with them. They ask, why do I feel this way when things are finally going well? But nothing is wrong with them. What's wrong is the belief that external success guarantees internal peace. It doesn't. True peace comes from congruence, when the person you show the world matches the person you feel you are inside. So many people chase safety, stability, approval, and achievement, and they abandon authenticity in the process. They build a life that impresses but doesn't nourish. They check all the boxes but still feel empty. And that emptiness becomes the space where anxiety thrives, because anxiety doesn't come from having too little. It often comes from ignoring too much, ignoring your needs, your truth, your emotional reality. The moment you close that gap, the moment you reconnect with what you feel, not just what you show, everything begins to shift. Anxiety loses its power, not because your life becomes perfect, but because your inner and outer world stop fighting each other. And when that internal war ends, your nervous system can finally breathe again. You don't need a different life to feel less anxious. You need a more honest one. And that honesty begins with admitting that even when life looks good, you still deserve to feel good. That's the real breakthrough. There's something important we need to talk about, something most people never admit out loud. The people who look like they got everything handled, the strong ones, the achievers, the ones others go to for advice, support, inspiration though, those are often the people who carry the heaviest anxiety. Not because their lives are falling apart, but because they're carrying expectations that never stop growing. High achievers don't just have dreams, they carry responsibility, they carry pressure. And pressure, when not understood or released, slowly becomes anxiety. When you're someone who constantly strives, who pushes, who aims higher, you start to feel like slowing down is failure, like resting makes you weak. Like saying, I'm struggling, means you're not worthy of the success you've built. So instead of giving yourself permission to breathe, you keep going, you keep pushing, you keep performing, and all the while, the pressure stacks up inside you like a weight no one else sees. People who expect a lot from themselves often forget that expectations come with emotional consequences. Every goal becomes a standard. Every achievement becomes the new baseline. You don't climb the mountain and celebrate. You climb it and immediately look up at the next peak. High achievers rarely feel done. They rarely feel satisfied. They feel responsible for more and more. And that constant striving creates a nervous system that's always activated, always anticipating, always preparing, never resting. And that's where anxiety hides. It hides in the belief that you must always be strong. It hides in the belief that if you slow down, everything will fall apart. It hides in the belief that your worth is tied to your output. It hides in the belief that if others see you struggle, they'll think less of you. High achievers don't fear failure as much as they fear disappointing others or disappointing themselves. And that fear alone can feed anxiety faster than anything else. For so many people, the greatest pressure doesn't come from the world. It comes from within. It comes from that internal voice saying, you should be doing more. You should be further ahead. You should handle this better. You should never struggle. That voice becomes a dictator. It becomes the ruler of your emotions. And when you can't meet its impossible standards, it punishes you with anxiety. But here's the truth: most achievers never hear the higher your standards. The harder you are on yourself, the more likely anxiety will show up, not because you're weak, but because you're human. People who give a lot often forget to receive. People who show up for others forget to show up for themselves. People who push through pain forget they're allowed to feel it. And when your entire identity is tied to being the one who always gets things done, always stays in control, always handles everything, then even the smallest wobble can feel like a collapse. That's why anxiety hits them so hard, because they have no emotional margin left. And let's be honest, high achievers often live with a hidden fear, the fear of losing what they've built. Success becomes something they must protect constantly, so they work harder, stay more alert, keep anticipating problems, and push themselves beyond what's healthy. That constant hypervigilance, that constant readiness, is exactly what anxiety feeds on. The mind stays in survival mode even when the environment is safe. The body stays tense even when the stress is over. The heart stays guarded even when life is good. Too many people believe they have to prove their worth through productivity. They believe rest must be earned. They believe ease is suspicious. They believe happiness will make them lazy. And because of that, they treat peace like a luxury instead of a necessity. They don't realize that performing at a high level doesn't mean you have to live at a high level of pressure. Anxiety thrives when life becomes an endless performance. But you can shift that. You can choose something different. You can recognize that the pressure you feel is not a requirement, it's a habit, it's a pattern, it's a trained belief, not a truth. You can achieve massively without destroying your peace. You can hold high standards without crushing yourself. You can be strong without pretending to be invincible. The moment you allow yourself to be human, to breathe, to feel rest, to not have all the answers, something powerful happens. The pressure loosens, the anxiety softens, the nervous system recalibrates. And you start to remember something you forgot along the way. You are not a machine. You are not a performance. You are not defined by productivity. You are allowed to grow without grinding yourself into the ground. You are allowed to live without carrying the world on your shoulders. There's a certain kind of person who carries their emotions like they're carrying fragile glass, carefully, quietly, tightly. They don't express much. They don't unload. They don't want to burden anyone. They tell themselves they're fine even when they're breaking. They convince the world they're strong, composed, unshakable. And for a while, that works. For a while, they hold everything together. But what they don't realize is these emotions don't disappear just because you hide them. They don't dissolve because you silence them. They don't lose power because you deny them. Suppressed emotions don't die. They multiply. So many people who should be happy struggle with anxiety not because their lives are bad, but because they've never given themselves permission to feel everything they've been holding back. They grew up believing they needed to be strong. They learned early that vulnerability made them appear weak. They were told to toughen up, not cry, not complain. And somewhere along the way, they started believing that expressing emotion was a threat to their image, their stability, their identity. So they swallowed it, all of it. But when you swallow pain, disappointment, fear, resentment, loneliness, when you push those emotions down deep, they don't go away. They settle. They settle inside your chest, inside your nervous system. Inside your thoughts, they settle like a weight you're not aware of until one day your mind can't carry it anymore. And that's when anxiety shows up. Anxiety is often just the echo of unexpressed emotion. It's the body saying, hey, you've been ignoring this for too long. It's the mind saying something inside you needs attention. It's the soul saying you've been quiet when you needed to speak. Anxiety appears when you've been strong for too long in the wrong way, in the way that suppresses instead of heals. People who suppress their feelings don't do it because they're careless. They do it because they care too much. They care about not disappointing others. They care about keeping the peace. They care about being dependable. They care about protecting those around them from their own struggles. And many times, they care so much that they sacrifice their emotional truth to keep everything looking stable. But that sacrifice always has a cost. When you're constantly holding things inside, you're living in emotional tension, and tension always needs a release. But if you refuse to release it through expression, conversation, or honest reflection, the body releases it for you through anxiety, panic, overthinking, and stress. Think about this every time you force yourself to stay quiet, every time you avoid saying how you really feel, every time you pretend you're okay just to keep the peace, you're placing another brick inside your emotional backpack. One day that backpack becomes too heavy and your body does the only thing it can to lighten the load. It reacts. It triggers anxiety to wake you up, to get your attention, to force you to feel what you've been ignoring. Suppressed emotions often come from childhood patterns, moments where you were punished for expressing your feelings or mocked or misunderstood. Maybe you grew up in an environment where emotions weren't safe. Maybe you learned that your needs didn't matter. Maybe you internalized the belief that your role was to be the strong one, the stable one, the protector. And now that you're older, you still live by the rules you created as a child. You don't share because you don't want to inconvenience anyone. You don't express hurt because you don't want to seem dramatic. You don't admit fear because you don't want to appear weak. You don't show sadness because you don't want to worry others. And little by little, your inner world becomes a place where nothing gets processed, but everything gets stored. And anything stored long enough becomes heavier, darker, louder. People who seem calm on the outside are often the ones battling the loudest storms internally. And the problem is they're so used to hiding this storm that even when it floods them, they don't know how to ask for support. They think emotional expression is the problem, when in reality, it's the solution. Here's what most people don't realize: expression is not weakness. It's release. It's not falling apart. It's letting go. It's not burdening others. It's freeing yourself from the burden you've been carrying alone. There's power in saying, this hurt me. There's power in admitting, I'm overwhelmed. There's power in sharing, I need help. There's power in feeling without fear. And when you finally allow yourself to feel, to speak, to release, anxiety loses the grip it has on your body. The tension softens. The mind quiets. The heart opens. Because healing begins the moment expression replaces suppression. You don't break when you express your emotions. You break when you don't. So many people wake up in the morning and wonder, why do I feel anxious when nothing is wrong? Why does my chest feel tight when life is finally stable? Why does my mind race even on the good days? And the answer isn't because you're broken or ungrateful or weak. It's because your brain was never designed to make you happy. It was designed to keep you alive. And for thousands of years, survival was the priority, not fulfillment, not joy, not peace. Survival. Your brain is wired with ancient programming. It's built to scan for threats, anticipate danger, and prepare for the worst. And that wiring doesn't disappear just because your life is comfortable now. Your nervous system doesn't evolve at the speed your lifestyle does. So even when everything is good, even when you're safe, even when you're surrounded by love and opportunity, your brain is still doing what it has always done, searching for what could go wrong. This is why anxiety hits people who should be happy, because the brain doesn't care that you have a good job or a supportive family or a stable life. It cares about one thing: protection. And if you don't understand this, you'll spend your entire life fighting your own biology instead of working with it. Imagine this: every time something good starts happening, your mind jumps in and says, be careful. Don't get too excited. This might not last. Something could ruin this. You've probably felt that before. That sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. That subtle fear that if things are going well, disaster must be around the corner. That's not intuition. That's not a sign something is wrong. That's your survival brain trying to keep you safe by limiting your joy. High alert thinking helped your ancestors stay alive, but for you today, that same hypervigilance becomes anxiety. And here's what makes it even more complicated: the brain doesn't distinguish between emotional threats and physical ones. A harsh comment, a stressful conversation, an uncertain future, a fear of judgment. The brain treats all of it like danger. So even when you're not actually threatened, your nervous system reacts as if you are. Your heart races, your stomach tightens, your thoughts spiral, your breathing shortens. And then you judge yourself for feeling this way. But there is nothing wrong with you. There is something human happening inside you. And for some of you, the wiring is even more sensitive because of your past experiences. Maybe you grew up in an unstable environment. Maybe you dealt with disappointment, unpredictability, trauma, or loss. Maybe you learned early that good moments never last. So now as an adult, whenever something positive shows up, your brain reacts with suspicion instead of celebration. It's protecting you from pain it learned to expect. When the brain doesn't trust peace, it creates anxiety. But here's the powerful part: once you understand how your brain works, you can start taking back the steering wheel. You can stop treating every sensation of anxiety like an emergency and start recognizing it as outdated programming. You can begin to teach your brain that safety exists without fear. That happiness doesn't require constant scanning for danger. That being present doesn't make you vulnerable, it makes you alive. Most people try to fight their anxiety by resisting it, suppressing it, or shaming themselves for feeling it. But that only makes it stronger. What you resist persists. The real breakthrough comes when you acknowledge it without judgment. When you tell yourself, my brain is trying to protect me, but I am safe. When you shift from fear to understanding. Understanding rewires you. Compassion rewires you. Awareness rewires you. When the brain senses that you're no longer reacting to every perceived threat, it starts to calm down. The alarms turn off. The nervous system relaxes. The body begins to trust the environment again. And slowly, the grip of anxiety loosens. You were never meant to eliminate anxiety. You were meant to master your relationship with it. You were meant to train your mind the same way you train your body. Consistently, consciously, intentionally, you were meant to show your brain that you are no longer living in a world where danger lurks behind every corner. You're living in a world where growth, joy, connection, and purpose matter more than survival. Once your brain learns that happiness is safe, it becomes possible to experience joy without fear. It becomes possible to breathe without tension. It becomes possible to feel peace without waiting for it to be taken away. You don't need a new life to feel calm. You need a new relationship with your mind. There's a reason so many people who seem to have it all still feel anxious, restless, or unsettled. And it's because happiness without purpose always feels incomplete. You can have comfort, success, stability, even love, and still wake up with that tightness in your chest, that heaviness in your thoughts, that silent question running through your mind. Why don't I feel the way I'm supposed to feel? And it's not because anything is wrong with your life. It's because something inside you is craving meaning. Human beings aren't built to simply exist. We're wired to grow, to contribute, to rise, to evolve. When your life is full but your purpose is empty, anxiety steps in to fill the space. When you stop feeling pulled by something bigger than yourself, you start feeling pushed by fear, doubt, and uncertainty. And this is where so many people get confused. They think anxiety means they're broken or ungrateful, when really it's just a signal that they're not living in alignment with what their soul needs. Purpose is oxygen for the mind. Without it, the mind begins to suffocate and worry. When you're not moving towards something meaningful, your energy has nowhere to go. So it turns inward, it becomes overthinking, stress, tension, anxiety. When your life lacks direction, your mind creates drama to give itself something to react to. And suddenly, even the smallest problems feel overwhelming because there's nothing bigger to anchor you. Purpose makes problems feel smaller. Lack of purpose makes everything feel heavier. Think about the times in your life when you felt most alive. Maybe you were working on something that mattered to you, or helping someone you cared about, or building something that made you feel proud. During those moments, anxiety wasn't loud. It wasn't in control. Why? Because purpose gives your mind something constructive to focus on. It gives you momentum. It gives you clarity. When you know where you're going, the noise in your head becomes quieter. But when you have no purpose pulling you forward, you start living reactively. You start measuring your life by accomplishments instead of fulfillment, by how things look instead of how they feel. You start chasing achievements instead of meaning, and achievements without meaning are empty calories. They give you a quick hit, but they don't nourish your soul. People who should be happy often built a life based on expectations, not desire. They followed the blueprint they were told would lead to happiness: get the job, build the family, earn the money, create stability. And yes, those things matter, but they're not the whole picture, because you can check every box and still feel like something is missing. And that missing piece is usually purpose. Purpose isn't about achieving something huge or dramatic. It's not about being famous or changing the entire world. Purpose is alignment. It's the feeling that what you're doing matters, even in a small way. It's the sense that you're growing, contributing, expressing who you truly are. Purpose doesn't always look like a mission. Sometimes it just looks like authenticity. When you're living a life that doesn't match your inner truth, your nervous system reacts, your body knows, your emotions know. You can't fake alignment, not to yourself. You might convince the world, but you can't convince your soul. And when you live out of alignment, anxiety becomes the alarm that something needs to change. And here's something most people never realize: purpose isn't something you find. It's something you decide. It's something you choose. It's something you create. And it usually starts with one simple question: what makes me feel alive? If you can answer that honestly, you can begin to rebuild a life that brings you peace instead of pressure. People who lack purpose often look for happiness in external sources: relationships, achievements, status, validation. But none of those things can substitute for meaning. They can add to your life, but they can't define it. Because fulfillment comes from expression, not possession. When you reconnect with purpose, real purpose, something shifts inside you. Anxiety loosens its grip because your mind finally has direction. Fear loses power because you know what you're standing for. And suddenly, life feels lighter, not because it changed, because you changed. Purpose gives your emotions a home. Purpose gives your energy meaning. Purpose gives your anxiety a reason to quiet down. You don't need a bigger life to feel less anxious. You need a more meaningful one. There's a moment in everyone's life when they look around and ask themselves, why does this keep happening to me? Why do I feel this way again? Why do I fall into the same patterns even when I know better? And the truth is, it's not because you're cursed or unlucky or incapable of changing. It's because what you don't heal, you repeat. What you don't face, you relive. What you don't understand, you get trapped inside of again and again. Most people who should be happy aren't struggling because of what's happening in their life right now. They're struggling because of the patterns that started long before this moment, patterns that were formed in childhood, shaped by pain, strengthened through repetition, and etched into the nervous system so deeply that they feel like personality traits instead of emotional wounds. And when you carry those patterns into adulthood without healing them, they show up everywhere in your relationships, in your ambitions, in your fears, in your reactions, in your anxiety. Anxiety isn't always the problem. Sometimes it's the symptom of an old story you never learned to end. You might wonder why you panic when someone raises their voice, why you shut down when conflict appears, why you overthink every decision, why you expect abandonment even in good relationships, why success makes you nervous instead of proud. It's not random, it's history. Your nervous system remembers what your mind tries to forget. And the hardest part is that these patterns feel so familiar that you begin to believe they're part of who you are. You start telling yourself, this is just me. This is how I've always been. This is just the way I respond. But it's not who you are, it's who you became in response to what you went through. There's a big difference. People replay old patterns because the brain is wired to choose the familiar over the unknown, even when the familiar hurts, because the familiar feels safe. The familiar feels predictable. Even pain can feel comfortable if you've lived with it long enough. That's why people stay in cycles they know they should break. That's why anxiety keeps showing up even when nothing is wrong, because something inside you still hasn't been resolved. You see, healing isn't about fixing the past. It's about freeing yourself from the way the past still lives inside you. It's about breaking the emotional habits that your younger self created to survive. And many of those habits served you back then. They protected you, shielded you, helped you cope. But now, as an adult, they're limiting you. And your anxiety is just your mind's way of saying, it's time to let this go. It's time to evolve. People often think healing means confronting huge traumas, but sometimes it's much simpler. It's the small moments you never processed, the emotions you never voiced, the boundaries you never set, the pain you never acknowledged. Healing happens when you're honest with yourself, brutally honest about what hurt you, what shaped you, and what still controls you. You can't break a pattern you won't look at. You can't heal a wound you won't touch. You can't silence anxiety while avoiding the truth. And the moment you finally stop running from your story and start facing it, something incredible happens. The pattern loses power. The cycle starts to break. The emotions that once overwhelmed you begin to release. The anxiety that felt suffocating begins to soften. Because healing isn't about fighting. It's about understanding. It's about integrating the parts of you that were left behind. It's about giving your younger self the safety and compassion they never had. And when you do that, the pattern ends. Not overnight, not instantly, but gradually, consistently, unmistakably. Every time you choose awareness over avoidance, the pattern cracks. Every time you choose honesty over pretending, the pattern weakens. Every time you choose to feel instead of suppressing, the pattern dissolves. And every time you choose healing, anxiety loses another piece of its grip on your life. This is why so many people who should be happy still feel anxious, because happiness can't override old wounds. Joy can't cover unhealed pain. Success can't erase childhood patterns. The only thing that frees you is self-awareness, compassion, and the willingness to break cycles you didn't choose but were forced to carry. You don't need to become someone new to heal. You need to stop carrying the parts of your past that were never yours to begin with. You stop repeating the story the moment you decide to rewrite it.